Welcome, everybody. Shelley is not here this evening. They are on retreat, leading a retreat, I think at Cloud Mountain, which is in the state of Washington. My name is Patrice Koelsch. I'm a longtime member of this community, and tonight, actually, I'm going to talk about sort of my journey with the practice. And I have a rather it was a daunting topic. I hope it doesn't sound too academic. But what I really want to talk about is the empiricism and the pragmatism of the Dharma, and why I can call myself a Buddhist. But I want to begin with a land acknowledgement, because common ground is cited on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homeland of the Dakota people. This land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance to its original inhabitants and their descendants who live here today, and to their future generations. And we acknowledge the sovereignty of Native nations and our obligations to live up to our treaty agreements. And some of you may know that the most sacred site in Dakota cosmology is not very far from here. It's at the confluence of the Minnesota and Mississippi River, and it's called the Bedote. And that's where the Dakota, the original people, came forth. And historically, many Dakota women would actually travel to that confluence and try to have their babies there, so that their babies would see, the first thing they'd see is the day as the original people saw it. So we are living very close to really sacred land. And it's our intention to rectify the harms that we've committed and those we continue to commit. This land acknowledgement is only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. It is our hope that our land acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Native nations and to amplify the voices of Indigenous people leading grassroots change movements. So we will begin with a lightly guided sit for about half an hour. So please be comfortable. If you need to get something from the closet or you need to make any adjustments. When I first started practicing, one of the first things Mark Nunberg said was that stillness was really important. Stillness was really good. But he said, if you have to move, just move mindfully. We're here to bring about the end of suffering, not to cause it. So that really made me think this is a practice I could embrace. So if you need to move, just move mindfully rather than torture yourself by staying in some position that's really uncomfortable. Okay. And when we're all meditating together, I always like to begin just by appreciating the goodness of being with like-minded people, people who have an intention not to harm, an intention to wake up in their lives, an intention to practice for the benefit of all beings. And when we sit together like this, we can really be aware that we give support to each other and get support from each other. So the Sangha, the community support, is something I really appreciate when I have the opportunity to sit with other people. And we can just begin our practice this evening by just gently bringing the attention into the body, just as it is right now, sitting upright, and letting our attention be with the body with a very kindly and gentle curiosity. Just how is the body? Bringing this attitude of friendliness, of interest, and acceptance of the body, however it is. And just breathing into this body right now. It is our faithful vehicle for awakening. And just as we bring a kindly curiosity to the body, we can bring that same sort of kindly curiosity to the mind, just as it is right now. Just noting calm all over the place, constricted, however it is. We don't have to judge it. We don't have to fix it. We can just be with the present moment as it is, in this mind right now. And mindfulness is the practice of being aware of the present moment's experience, just as it is. So not straining to have any particular kind of experience, not judging, but seeing if we can relax and be aware. Relax and be aware of our sensations, might be our perceptions, thoughts that come and go. And if it helps to use the breath to stabilize the attention, that's perfectly fine. But just let the attention rest with the breath as it comes in and out, rather than drilling down. Seeing if we can bring a kind of lightness to our practice, if we can enjoy our practice of just being right here with the present moment's experience, just however it is. Noting its beginnings, its endings. And as much as possible, maintaining an attitude of friendly kindliness toward our experience. I'll relax and enjoy the silence. For the last minute or two of our formal practice, I invite you to see if in the present moment experience there is any flavor or fragrance of gratitude or appreciation that's actually there. Not something that you have to fabricate, but in my experience, it's something that's often there as kind of a subtle undertone that's present, but I'm not always aware that it's present. So you might just investigate and see if there's any flavor of gratitude or appreciation in the present moment's experience. So take a moment to stretch, maybe say hello to the person next to you. And although I had it here on a Post-it, I didn't ask, is there anyone who's here for the first time tonight? Oh, well, welcome. And your name is? Jackie, and you are? Debbie. Debbie. Welcome, welcome. And is there anyone online who's here for the first time? You are. Hello, I can't see your name on the, you are, do you want to unmute yourself and tell us your name?
Betty Gale.
Betty. Nice to meet you, Betty Gale. Okay.
We do lock the front door during program. So if you do find yourself outside, feel free to hit the buzzer. I got it right here in my pocket.
Okay. All right. So I want to begin this evening with a sutta, teachings of the Buddha, the recorded teachings of the Buddha that were actually only written down hundreds of years after the lifetime of the Buddha. It was an oral tradition. But this sutta, the sutta of the Kalmans, has really been a touchstone for me. And this is when the Buddha went and met with a community of people who had questions. And during the Buddha lived at a very, very lively, volatile time. There were lots of people with theories. It's the Jain religion had been recently established. There were lots of seekers. There were lots of people who were exploring things. And there was also sort of a political transition from more feudal small states, small groups into larger kind of nation states. So it was a very volatile time politically and philosophically. So the Buddha was one of many people who were preaching doctrines of how one should live one's life. And so the Kalmas say to the Buddha, "Venerable Sir, some ascetics and Brahmins who come to Kesaputta, which is the town they lived in, explain and elucidate their own doctrines, but disparage, debunk, revile, and vilify the doctrines of others. But then some other ascetics and Brahmins come to Kesaputta, and they too explain and elucidate their own doctrines, but disparage, debunk, revile, and vilify the doctrines of the others. For us, Venerable Sir, there is perplexity and doubt as to which of these good ascetics speak truth and which speak falsehood." And the Buddha replies, "It is fitting for you to be perplexed, O Kalamas. It is fitting for you to be in doubt. Doubt has arisen in you about a perplexing matter. Come, Kalamas, do not go by oral tradition, by lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of texts, by logic, by inferential reading, by reasoned cogitation, or by the acceptance of a view after pondering it, by the seeming competence of a speaker, or because you think this ascetic is our teacher. But when you know for yourself, these things are unwholesome, these things are blamable, these things are censured by the wise, these things, if undertaken and practiced, lead to harm and suffering, then you should abandon them. What do you think, Kalamas, when greed, hatred, and delusion arise in a person, is it for his welfare or harm? For his harm, Venerable Sir. Kalamas, a person who is greedy, hating, and deluded, overpowered by greed, hatred, and delusion, his thoughts controlled by them, will destroy life, will take what is not given, engage in sexual misconduct, and tell lies. He will also prompt others to do likewise. Will that conduce to his harm and suffering for a long time? Yes, Venerable Sir. And what do you think, Kalamas? Are these things wholesome or unwholesome? Unwholesome, Venerable Sir. Blamable or blameless? Blamable, Venerable Sir. Censured or praised by the wise? Censured, Venerable Sir. Undertaken and practiced, do they lead to harm and suffering or not? And how is this the case? Undertaken and practiced, these things do lead to harm and suffering, so it appears to us in this case. It was for this reason, Kalamas, that we said, do not go by oral tradition. Come, Kalamas, do not go by oral tradition, by lineage of teaching, by hearsay, by a collection of texts, by logic, by inferential reason, by reasoned cogitation, by the acceptance of a view after pondering it, by the seeming competence of a teacher, or because you think this ascetic is our teacher. But when you know for yourself, these things are wholesome, these things are blameless, these things are praised by the wise, these things, if undertaken and practiced, lead to the welfare of happiness, then you should engage in them. What do you think, Kalamas, when non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion arise in a person, is it for his welfare or harm? For his welfare, Venerable Sir. Kalamas, a person who is without greed, without hatred, without delusion, not overpowered by greed, hatred, and delusion, his thoughts not controlled by them, will they abstain from the destruction of life, from taking what is not given, from sexual misconduct, and from false speech? He will also prompt others to do likewise. Will that conduce to his welfare and happiness for a long time? Yes, Venerable Sir. And what do you think, Kalamas? Are these things wholesome or unwholesome? Wholesome, Venerable Sir. Blamable or blameless? Blameless, Venerable Sir. Censured or praised by the wise? Praised, Venerable Sir. Undertaken and practiced, do they lead to the welfare and happiness or not? Or how is this the case? Undertaken and practiced, these things lead to the welfare and happiness. So it appears to us in this case. It was for this reason, Kalamas, that we said, do not go upon oral tradition. Then Kalamas, that noble disciple, devoid of covetousness, devoid of ill will, unconfused, clearly comprehending, ever mindful, dwells pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness, likewise the second quarter, the third, and the fourth, thus above and below, across and everywhere, and to all as to himself. He dwells pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility and without ill will. He dwells pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with compassion, with altruistic joy, with equanimity, likewise the second quarter, the third, and the fourth, thus above and below, across and everywhere, and to all as to himself. He dwells pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with equanimity, vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility and without ill will. So this sutta is, for me, a real touchstone about relying on one's own understanding of one's own experience of what brings happiness, what brings joy. And it is about extinguishing greed, hatred, and delusion. And it is about living with mindfulness. And with mindfulness comes the development of loving kindness, of compassion, of appreciative joy, and equanimity. So this sutta really has a very clear encouragement for us to see for ourselves and not just to go on the basis of thinking someone is competent or someone is to see for ourselves, not to be cowed by authority. And I came to Buddhism with a really very practical, empirical question. And I want to tell you how I got there. So a little bit about my background. I was raised as sort of a social justice Catholic. So, that has been important to me throughout my life, of really having a foundation in the importance of treating others well, of really being attentive to the inequities in this world and doing something about it. And even when I was in high school, I found some of the metaphysics of the beliefs hard to believe, but because I went to a very progressive girls' Catholic high school, I told myself I was what's called a Kierkegaardian Christian. And for those of you who know anything about Kierkegaard, the philosopher, he said, faith requires this leap of faith because something's hard to believe. That's why it's really important to believe it. So I told myself for a long time, because I was so convinced by sort of Catholic social justice practices, that, well, I could be kind of a Kierkegaardian Catholic. So, and then I got to college. And in my first philosophy class in college, where we studied Descartes' method of doubt, I remember my adorable teaching assistant, whom I had a tremendous crush on, Mr. Mishke, talked to us about, he said, sometimes, he said, you can try to fool yourself about what you believe, but if you're really honest about yourself, because he was being critical of Descartes' method of doubt, that it was kind of a setup. And he said, no, if you're really honest with yourself about what you believe, you can't really fool yourself. And I really took that to heart. So although I felt very much informed by Catholic ethics, I left, I stopped being a practicing Catholic and actually got a Ph.D. in philosophy. So, but, my own inclination has always been to be really kind of skeptical, and certainly all my training in philosophy was about, like my first response to everything, and this is still pretty much my default. I hear something like my first response, is that true? Is that really true? And I just sort of lived with that for a long time. Didn't have any sort of religious practice in my 20s and 30s, and never. Meditation was so far beyond the pale. I went to a Tai Chi class once at the Y, and the person said, okay, so we're going to meditate for the first 15 minutes. And I almost left. I thought, if I knew I was going to waste my time, I'd have brought a book. So I was very skeptical, practical, pragmatic, had a tremendous interest in ethics and aesthetics as a philosopher, in feminism. And at this time in the 80s, every summer, my partner and I and our son, we would go out west and we'd go hiking in the Rockies or in the Beartooth, and we'd be in these just really, sublime places, just astonishingly beautiful. And in those places, I would think, okay, so the sort of existential unease that I had most of the time would sort of disappear. And I would think, okay, so my little itty bitty life span, like that. And here's this, enormous geological eons of time. I would just have a feeling of okayness. I mean, it was sort of like the existential angst of being a human being who was going to die someday, a small life. That angst kind of disappeared. And I became convinced that, okay, so what you needed in order to feel okay was just to be in really beautiful circumstances, and that would do it. And in the early 90s, I spent some time with a friend's son who was dying of AIDS. And I spent his last 2 weeks with him, and he was kind of in a hospice because my friend had to work, and so she could only be there in the evening. And at that time, I was doing a lot of freelance work and stuff, so I was available during the day. And we had a really good time for the first week, and he told me all about his adventures. And in the second week, he started very actively dying. So I had my books and my journal, and I thought, when he's sleeping, I will just read and I'll write. And instead, I just got really, really interested in what was going on. And I found over the next few days, as I sort of watched him more actively die, that I had that same sort of existential okayness. I mean, it was sad. He was in his mid-30s. He was dying of a really awful disease. He was pretty resigned to it. I mean, he was very accepting that his life was coming to an end, and that he was with people who really cared about him, that he was being treated well. But it was this sort of the labor of dying, the sort of shutting down of the body. I just got so interested in that. And that's it just, there's, I mean, this sounds so paradoxical in a way, but there really was an okayness about it. Okay, this is the way things are. This is what has come to be, and it's okay. And that's what raised for me this empirical question, which was, okay, so I didn't need the kind of incredible mountains. And here, I'm with someone with can I experience this okayness without the presence of the geographical spectacular or the gravity of death? And at that point, I thought, well, maybe I would find that in a meditation practice. And that's how I came to meditation, to see if in meditation I could feel that kind of okayness. I mean, it wasn't, like glorious bliss. It just was okay. So being able to be with things as they were, like being able to be with life and death, the shortness of life. And I live in the Seward neighborhood, and I live about a block and a half from where Mark Nunberg lives, and he used to teach in his house, and he had a little sign up, Common Ground Meditation. And so I went to a meditation class. It was Mark had just started teaching, and as I mentioned earlier, that one of the things that Mark said early on was, stillness is really good, but if you need to move, move, because we're here to look for the end of suffering and not to prolong it. And I thought, okay, so this is what I need for a meditation practice. So I found that it was, it was interesting, it was calming, it was stabilizing. I really appreciated the whole ethical part, non-harming. I took to heart the idea that, that the sort of the roots of our distress were often a matter of greed in all of its varieties, aversion in all of its varieties, or ignorance or delusion. So to really just keep examining my own mind. Is this greed? Is this delusion? It really began to make sense. So I became interested in because the contemplative practices really contributed to this sense of okayness. I became really interested, in Buddhism, but as a Western educated skeptic and empiricist, I thought I just can't make sense of some of the doctrines that I know that many Buddhists hold about rebirth or sort of a transgenerational concept of karma. That was just, I thought, I just can't be a Buddhist because I just can't make sense of that. And so this was about, I started in I think it was 1995. I think was it 94, 95, but it's around 94, 95. And in 1997, this book came out, Buddhism Without Beliefs. The subtitle is A Contemporary Guide to Awakening, and it's by Stephen Batchelor. And this was really the key to my being able to really embrace Buddhism. So I'm going to read a little bit from this. He says, it is often claimed that you cannot be a Buddhist if you do not accept the doctrine of rebirth. From a traditional point of view, it is indeed problematic to suspend belief in the idea of rebirth, since many basic notions have to be rethought. But if we follow the Buddha's instructions not to accept things blindly, then orthodoxy should not stand in the way of forming our own understanding. It may seem that there are two options, either believe in rebirth or not. But there's a third alternative, to acknowledge, in all honesty, I do not know. We neither have to adopt the literal version of rebirth presented by religious tradition, nor fall into the extreme of regarding death as annihilation. Regardless of what we believe, our actions will reverberate beyond our deaths. Irrespective of our personal survival, the legacy of our thoughts, words, and deeds will continue through the impressions we leave behind in the lives of those we have influenced or touched in any way. And that really resonated with me, and resonated that idea that, we do live on in the people that we have influenced. It's that idea you find actually in a lot of the Greek philosophers, talking about that the, sort of the strength of a person's character in some ways revealed by the persons that they have influenced. And I often reflect in my own life about how some qualities that I find in myself, like, oh, I got this from my mother, or some very dear friends who have died. Oh, this is what I learned from this person. So it was, this really enabled me to more and more understand Buddhism as a way of relating. And more it seemed to me that the Buddha, who never claimed to be more than an awakened being, he never claimed he was a god, he was a human being who awakened, that he was a skillful, I came to understand the Buddha more and more as a really skillful and pragmatic teacher who adapted his pedagogy to meet the student where the student was at. So for example, there's a very famous sutta where there was a young monk who was just really gung-ho and practiced and just made such tremendous effort and was so discouraged because he wasn't seeming to get anywhere in his meditation. And before he became a monk, he was a luthier. And the Buddha talked to him and said, so how was it when you played your instrument and your strings were too tight? And he said, well, it sounded terrible. And he said, and if they were too loose, well, the sound was awful too. So he said, so too, what you have to do is find this kind of middle way of just the right amount of effort rather than this extreme effort. So that's just sort of one example of how the Buddha sort of related to people in their particular circumstances. And as someone who used to be a teacher, I mean, I just really appreciated the skillfulness of the Buddha's pedagogy. So for example, when the Buddha talked about, sort of what we call the Four Noble Truths, what he used was a medical model to look at our suffering. So that in the medical model, you first identify the disease. The second, you isolate its causes. The third, you pronounce whether it's curable or not. And then the fourth is you prescribe the cure. So that's the model where the Buddha talked about how we experience suffering in our life, which was dukkha. And it's a word that is, it's the whole range of suffering from anguish to discomfort, that it's a spectrum. And the word dukkha in Pali, which is the language that the first Buddhist scriptures were written down in, the word comes from the idea of a wheel and a hub, and it's the misalignment when the wheel doesn't fit the axle. So it's, it goes clunk, clunk, clunk. It's when something is out of alignment. So we can understand dukkha in part as, or for me, one of the most helpful ways is to think, I'm out of alignment with reality. I'm really suffering when I'm out of alignment with how things are. Dukkha is also sometimes translated as stress, the whole variety of stressful experience. So the cause of our stress, of our dukkha, of our suffering is our self-centered craving, our wanting for things to be other than the way they are, our dissatisfaction with reality. And there's an end to it, the Buddha said, and the way is to follow the Eightfold Path, which is a path of wisdom teachings, of ethics, and of cultivation of the mind. So we can see this for ourselves. I mean, for anyone who has come and has practiced here, we look and we watch and see, is this true? Is my suffering partly or completely a matter of not being able to accept the way things are? Being able to accept the way things are doesn't mean that you really, you're happy about it. But for example, I think about what's going on in Gaza right now, which is horrifying in so many ways. And I know people who say, I can't watch it, I don't want to know about it. Or on the other extreme, who are just beside themselves with anger and rage. And neither of those seems like a very stable platform for doing anything that's effective. And James Baldwin famously said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And that actually is kind of one of the Buddhist teachings about how we need to be able to see things as they are, not as we would like them to be, in order to act effectively. So 20 years after Buddhism Without Beliefs, Stephen Batchelor described what he called an entirely pragmatic understanding of the Dharma. So I'm going to read a little bit of that to you from a book called Secular Buddhism, Imagining the Dharma in an Uncertain World. And Batchelor says when he uses the word secular, he's using it in the Latin sense of secula, of these times. It's not the way most people understand it as non-religious Buddhism, but he said specifically he means it to be what is an appropriate Buddhism for these times. And he says, as a practitioner, the task is to stabilize to stabilize attention on the fluid, unpredictable, and contingent nature of experience as the ground that enables one to take ethical choices that are not conditioned by habitual reactive patterns of greed, hatred, and self-centeredness. I take this to be the core of the Buddha's awakening, which he subsequently develops into a series of 4 tasks, which is the way he kind of reframes the Four Noble Truths: to comprehend dukkha, to let go of reactivity, to behold the stopping of reactivity, and to cultivate the Eightfold Path. And I have found it really helpful to often think about craving in terms and not being able to be with reality as reactivity. That when I reflect, it's when I am reactive to something rather than responsive, rather than when something just seems to trigger something. That's usually when I find myself getting in trouble. And finally, when another teacher who talks about sort of pragmatic Dharma a little differently, and this is Gil Fronsdal, who is the guiding teacher of the Insight Meditation Center of Redwood City. He says, he said, while I have some leanings towards secular Buddhism, my preference is to view my Buddhist orientation as naturalistic, and therefore to identify it as a Theravada form of naturalistic Buddhism. And he says, I shy away from actually identifying myself with the designation secular Buddhism because I understand the term to be oxymoronic. In ordinary English, secular is commonly contrasted with religious or spiritual. As I view Buddhism as a religion and my involvement with Buddhism as deeply religious, I am disinclined to describe myself as a secular Buddhist. Though the label naturalistic Buddhism, through the label naturalistic Buddhism, I refer to Buddhist teachings that rely on what can be observed in this very life through our natural senses. It does not require any beliefs, agency, entities, or experiences that are supernatural, that is, that fall outside the laws of nature as we know them, or outside of what we can know for ourselves through our ordinary natural senses. And he says, in studying the teachings of the Buddha, we should keep in mind these core principles of his teachings of the Dharma. To be the Dharma, teachings must be something that we can know for ourselves, accessible through our natural senses, albeit refined through the powers of concentration and mindfulness. The Dharma is realized through practices connected to the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion, and it culminates in the attainment of peace. And Fronsdal, like Stephen Batchelor says, that there are many Buddhists and Buddhist traditions which talk about the supernatural, which talk about multiple lives, which talk about a kind of karmic transmission over generations. And Gil Fronsdal, who's a very, very respected teacher, says, I never teach about that because that's not what is available to my own experience. I only teach what I know through my own natural senses. And that, brings us back to the Kalamas Sutta about being able to use our own natural senses, our own natural experience to really awaken, to practice, to cultivate the mind, to cultivate our powers of attention, and to really interrogate our own experience, to see when we're acting out of a sense of desire or grasping or greed, or out of a sense of aversion, or the harder one to realize when we've been deluded, when we're acting out of ignorance. So it's an ongoing inquiry. It's extremely empirical. It doesn't require any sort of metaphysical belief. And what I so appreciate about both Fronsdal and Batchelor is, you don't have to disparage anyone else's Buddhism. You don't have to criticize it. You can appreciate it. And there are some very, very beautiful devotional practices. I practiced in Thailand, and I practiced in Burma, and a little bit in India. And there are some really, really beautiful practices and beautiful systems that people have for living lives that are lives of non-harming. So we don't have to sort of say that's wrong, this is right. It's we can take the advice of the Buddha and really look to our own experience and these teachings. Is this really beneficial to me? Is this to my welfare? And I love that word welfare. And we talk about wanting the welfare of all beings. Is this to the goodness of all beings? And I think it's a wonderful sutta for encouraging this kind of investigation. We get to see for ourselves through our own experience of our minds and our hearts, and particularly looking at cause and effect, looking at the consequences of our action, looking at our intentions, looking at our actions and the consequences of our actions. And that's really the way we learn. And we get to learn in a community, which is really helpful to hear from other people's experiences. So thank you for your very kind attention. And I am happy to answer questions or your comments and observations. And Eric has the mic so that people online can also can hear what you have to say. So that's why we use the mic. So does anyone here in the room have something they'd like to ask or say? It's always an act of generosity to go first. Please, Joanne.
Hey, thanks, Patrice. That was a great talk to listen to. And that's been my sort of touchstone also to, is it beneficial? Does it work? Is it good for you? I mean, not only Buddhism in general, but how I practice Buddhism. And if it doesn't work for you, fine. But yeah, I've always loved that about Buddhism, is that it's completely empirical, kind of like Chinese medicine is too. If it works, great. If it doesn't, yeah. But thank you. It's great to hear it in the context also of Descartes and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Joanne. Sometimes the Buddha talked about his path as a middle path between the extremes of asceticism and the extreme of indulgence. And I've come to believe that the middle path is a really wide path. So, we can all find our way along it. Anyone online have anything they'd like to ask, or you can unmute yourself? Sometimes people make the analogy that there are as many sort of forms and flavors and sects of Buddhism as there are of Christianity. So it's a very large rubric, and big tent encompasses a lot of very, very different kinds of practices, and for some people beliefs, but this is not particularly a practice based on beliefs. I mean, Shelley has often talked about faith in here, but they talk about faith as confidence that from your own experience, this seems to be a path that is fruitful, that it brings that sort of what I talked in the very beginning, that sort of existential okayness, of being able to be with what is really difficult, like Gaza, for example, to really take in what is happening and how, what our efficacy can be. And it might be writing our representatives, it might be making donations like World Central Kitchen, or it might be saying, I recognize that that's happening there, and I can't make much of change about that. So what I will do is work on something in my own community where I can have a much more direct effect, instead of being kind of paralyzed by what's happening someplace else. And I think that's one of the benefits of a practice like this, is to be very honest about what's the reality, what can I do, where can I be effective in promoting non-harming, in relieving suffering, the very tangible suffering of other people. Other thoughts people might have. Thoughts and observations are really welcome. Or if you find something you don't agree with. Could you say your name, please?
I'm Anna Shide. Something that has come up for me in engaging in this practice, and I'm curious your thoughts on, is appropriation and appreciation, as like a white person coming into a practice that is not traditionally passed down. I'm just curious if you have thoughts on that, engaging in it in a wholesome way, with that in mind. It's just something that's come up for me. I'm curious your thoughts on.
It's a great question, because although Buddhism has sort of moved all over the world, and people practice in Mongolia, people practice in South Africa, all over. One very poignant and pointed criticism that really emerged, I would say, in the late teens, was the criticism by a number of Asian Americans about how, Western teachers went to Burma and to Thailand. Many of them were Peace Corps people, and they learned about the practice there. And they came back and sort of established Western Buddhism in the United States and Canada. And there was a great criticism in the late, I think it was in the teens, about how the contributions of the Japanese and the Chinese who brought Buddhism to America, especially on the West Coast in the 19th century, and how those communities have continued, and how many Western practitioners, including teachers, were ignorant about those, or they talked about, sort of Buddhism without baggage. And it was in some sense sort of disparaging of the traditions and the contributions of some Asian Buddhists. And that when the Second World War happened and they rounded up people for the internment camps, the first ones who were taken were the Buddhist priests on Hawaii and in California. And there are a number of active Asian Buddhist communities, even here in Minnesota, and they really focus on helping people continue the culture. So, for example, in Hampton, Minnesota, there is a Cambodian Wat. It is fabulous, and people are welcome to go, and they have big festivals. But it's really about keeping Khmer culture, and there are a number of monks there, and amazing statues, like 40-foot high Buddhas, and like in the middle of the cornfield. It is fabulous, and they always welcome people. And but their interest is in the sort of Buddhist practice that is integral to Khmer culture. And so there's a Wat in Thai Wat temple in St. Louis Park. And there are a number of, there is the Vietnamese, there are two Vietnamese temples. Actually, both are on Como. One is in what used to be a Dick's Sporting Goods store, and the other is in Roseville. And again, the focus at those temples, which welcome they're delighted to meet other people come, but it's really about the preservation of culture and the preservation of language. So I think that there has been just a very appropriate criticism of somehow thinking, that sort of Western convert Buddhism is the real Buddhism, or the better Buddhism, or as people say, like Buddhism without baggage, which is just really disparaging. It's just a very, it's just a different, as a Western skeptic, this is sort of the practice that I can embrace. Someone from another culture embraces the practice very, very differently, and it's just different. But I'm glad you brought that up, Anna, because there was a real critique and several books written and discussion about how those communities have been really important in the United States, the Japanese Buddhist community and the Chinese Buddhist community. And then there are these others, and there are Sri Lankan community, Bante Gunarat, Bante Sati, is at the Metta retreat down in Janesville in Minnesota, and there are Sri Lankan monks, and that serves a kind of mixed community, Sri Lankan and non-Sri Lankan, and it's a more traditional practice, I would say, than we do here at Common Ground, but it's quite beautiful. And years ago, I was at actually the Vietnamese temple, and Bhante Sati was teaching a retreat there, and there was a woman there who said that this was her first time ever coming to anything Buddhist, and she said, and I say this with all respect, it's just very hard for me to accept some of these things because she said, because I believe that Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and he died for my sins. And without missing a beat, Bhante Sati said, "Oh no, madam, he died because it was his karma." But he meant that sincerely. I mean, it wasn't, it was, and I thought, yeah, this is kind of his worldview. He's a more orthodox Theravadan person with a very, a very sweet ethical sensibility. So, we can appreciate other traditions, and also realize that, for some of them, the purpose is partly cultural preservation in a place that tends to want to homogenize and assimilate, and to be really respectful of that. Anything else? Anyone online want to say anything? Well, we are almost at the end of our, Eric has some announcements.
So I have some announcements, but I just want to say, yesterday I was at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. There is a huge Tibetan Buddhism exhibit that is on display on the second floor right now, that I thought was beautiful. Statues and some of them 1,100 years old and older. And I also want to second the Wat in Hampton, Minnesota, which they consider to be the largest Buddhist temple in the United States. And it's in the middle of, it's literally, they bought a farm and they started carving things and putting them together. And you can see, what I appreciate about that place is you can see not only the history and the culture, but the forward thinking of, oh, we're going to build another temple over here, and we're going to build another thing over here, and we're going to build another prayer hall over here. And we're in the middle of it, and there's all this stone that's being carved and put together. And if you really want to dive into Khmer Buddhist culture, go to one of their community weekends. It's really something. The chanting and the praying and just the pure giving of the community. It's really beautiful.
I think one of the things that's so remarkable about that is that so much of it is volunteer labor. I mean, and the generosity of people, as with Fatam, the Wat that's in Roseville, that was all built by community members, maybe 30 some years ago. And the generosity, the devotion, it is, there's something just so beautiful about the way people just give of their time and resources to build these places. And it is really very, very inspirational. And we try to do that here at Common Ground, of having work weekends and things where people did, and with this building, I remember spending weekends like pulling staples out of the floor when this used to just be a diner, and it was very, very very different. But that idea of a practice that just infuses your life with generosity and the desire to help out and to give is just it's really a blessing to have that sort of generosity. And that the historical Buddha, that was like the first thing that he taught, like generosity is the sort of threshold to developing a practice. And being less self-centered is kind of the key. So.
And speaking of generosity, Common Ground works on the concept of dana. Everything is freely given, freely received. We don't charge anything for anything here. So everything is so this building was built with generosity. They're doing work out at the retreat center this week. People working out of generosity. I've seen some pictures online of the hard work they've been putting in the heat. And when we have a guest teacher here at Common Ground, everything out of whatever is donated in the dana bowls right behind me on the other side of this wall, or electronically, 2/3 of that goes to the guest teacher. The rest goes to the center. And so if the spirit moves you, feel free. There are lots and lots and lots of ways to participate in generous giving back at Common Ground. Lots and lots of different ways. What I do, I feel, is very minor. So feel free. I also have some announcements. Workshops here at the center, City Center, Introduction to Mindfulness Meditation Workshop with Stacy McClendon this Saturday, the 19th from 9:30 to 4. Half-day retreat with Jean Haley, Saturday after that from 1 to 5 on the 26th. Day-long retreat for the BIPOC community with Stacy McClendon, Saturday, August 9th from 9:30 to 4, and half-day retreat with Gabe Keller-Flores, Saturday, August 16th from 9 to 1. Out at the retreat center, there are some very small waiting lists for some of these things. Cultivating Virtue as a Support for Awakening residential retreat with Win Fricke and Gabe Keller-Flores, Thursday the 24th through Sunday the 27th. Divine Abodes Retreat, 4 Dimensions of Love with Patrice, Thursday, August 14th through Sunday, August 17th. Labor Day retreat with Shelley and Mark out at the retreat center, Saturday the 23rd through Monday the 1st. So that's an 8-day. You can register for retreats, courses, and workshops at commongroundmeditation.org/calendar. And as you leave, if I could just get a couple of people to help put these chairs up against the wall, that would be great. Thank you very much tonight for your teachings, Patrice. Always appreciated.
Thanks everyone for coming this evening.